That's good. Okay, I'm working on the Hawk. I put 70 more miles on it a couple of days ago. So we're at 282. Well, I figured out that is, of course, like I said, it's probably supposed to be kilometers, but it's actually kilo yards, almost exactly, because 100 of these turns out to be 57, between 57 and 57 and a half on miles, and as it turns out, 56.8 miles is 100 kilo yards. So I'm sure that wasn't intentional, but this is kilo yards. That's okay, whatever. Let me stop and defog my lens. It's really humid out here. Okay, that's a little better. So I just took the plug out, and you can see that's definitely showing lean condition, and it's worst at low throttle, or around mid throttle levels, just cruising along at 40 miles per hour or so, 35 to 40 miles per hour. So that tells me that shimming the needle up will work wonders. Probably it'll fatten it up in that range, and when I give it full throttle, it seems to really wake up, or anywhere from 3/4 to full throttle. I can really feel a boost. So I think that the main jet is probably not too far off. It's probably acceptable, but I haven't even taken the slide out of the carburetor yet, so we're going to do that right now. I think that's going to, like I said, shimming the needle up is going to be the main thing. We'll check and see if it's got slots in it, but I don't think it does. So that's what it looks like. You just unscrew that top cap and pull it out. Pull the slide out. That's the throttle slide. And that is the jet needle. So, and looking down in there at the E-clip, it's pretty obvious that it doesn't have slots. Because on an adjustable carburetor, there will be several slots in the needle, so you can move that E-clip up and down, thereby moving the needle up and down, which changes the mixture at mid throttle. I'm also going to go ahead and pull the carburetor off and see if I can pop the plastic cap off of the idle adjustment, so that I'll be able to adjust the idle mixture. But I'm not going to try to adjust the idle mixture until I try it with the shimmed up jet, or shimmed up needle, because I've been able to kickstart it. And I wanted to point out another thing. I'm going to go ahead and adjust the valves too. So 1, 2, 3 bolts, and might as well, I took the tank off for ease of access to the carburetor, although you can reach the carburetor without taking the tank off, but by taking the tank off I can reach it from the top and reach it more easily. But one problem I have noticed is that it's not charging the battery. And so that will either be, most likely, the regulator. It could even be just one of the connectors is not making connection to the regulator. So where is the regulator? That's the next question. Here is, let me see. Of course, it could be the stator. Either way, that should be replaced under warranty. I'm sure, you know, I troubleshoot it, figure out exactly where the problem is. They'll send me the part to replace it. But either way, the parts are not expensive on these bikes. So even if I ended up having to buy the parts, it still wouldn't be a major problem. But let's see. Okay, so this, yeah, this one will be the wire coming from the stator. So it might just be one of these connections in here, actually. That'll be it right there. No, it won't. I don't think. I don't know. Yellow and blue. Well, there's a yellow and blue here too. So it's probably this one though. Okay, anyway, I'm going to test that. I'm going to unplug the regulator once I figure out where it is, and check for AC voltage coming out of the stator, and if that's there, then we know it's the regulator. Of course, it's possible that if the regulator is not working, it's possible that that itself, not having a load on the stator, could take out the stator. But either way, like I said, it's not going to be a major problem. The stator is under this cover, so if I have to replace it, I will. But one of those three things, stator, regulator, or hopefully just wire connections, is why it's not charging. Of course, the thing about these bikes though is, see, here's the CDI. These CDIs are cheap, by the way, and fortunately it's an AC CDI. A lot of people think you want a DC CDI because, you know, they don't rely on high voltage from the stator and so on. No, I disagree. The problem with the DC CDI is it's got a built-in inverter to give it the high voltage. That's not this. This doesn't have that. But that built-in inverter is the #1 failure point of CDIs that have it. And so a DC CDI is far more likely to fail. The simplest way to go is an AC CDI, which is what this has, like I said, and it just has medium voltage. It has its own winding in the stator that's separate from the battery charge windings and not connected in any way. And that's why, for example, my TW200, I was able to, by having kickstart, I was able to run it for a long time without even having a battery in it. And same thing with this. Even though the charge stator is not, if it's putting out anything, it's not getting into the system. But even without that, it doesn't affect its running. you know, the battery could be completely dead, and it did. It got so dead that it was showing empty on the fuel gauge, which is just an amp meter, is all a fuel gauge is. It was showing empty even though the tank was still 2/3 full. And the reason it was showing empty is because the battery was dead. I mean, flat dead. And yet, it didn't affect the running. It just meant I had no lights and no fuel gauge. So, anyway, as I was saying, in an AC CDI system, which is the simplest ignition system you can get, basically, because, you know, some would argue that a point system can be simpler, and some of the earlier Hondas had AC point systems, which I like better than the DC point system that some of them had, because the DC point system needed a battery. In fact, it needed a well-charged battery. But the AC point system worked well, but the points are a wearing component. They're a component that can develop problems, and then they also require some sort of advanced curve mechanism, and that mechanism can cause problems. So that's why I say that an AC powered CDI system is the simplest type of ignition system you can have, because all it is there is a charge winding, CDI charge winding in here, just a single winding, and it provides medium voltage AC, and by medium voltage I mean somewhere in the range of 75 volts to 300 volts to charge the capacitor in the CDI. And most of them also have a pickup coil also in here, so it tells it where the crank is. Some of them don't even have that. The motorized bicycle CDIs, for example, the 2-strokes, they don't even have that. They just depend on the voltage buildup. Once it builds up to a certain level, it fires automatically. So they're even simpler. But anyway, with this type of setup, the rest of your electrical system can completely fail, and it won't affect the ignition. And if something goes out, it's most likely going to be the CDI. These CDIs are cheap. This particular version is about $12. So you can carry a spare one and swap it out if it does go out. But anyway, enough about that. But I'm going to troubleshoot this today. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go ahead and adjust the valves since I've got the tank off, and it's time for it anyway. And we'll go from there. Okay, so here's one way to check the valve lash. There are a few ways. I've got the spark plug out so that I'm not fighting against the compression, and that also allows me to do this. This is a bamboo skewer, a shish kebab skewer. Okay, I can feel the piston there. It's at close to top dead center. Okay, now it's moving down, and you can see it compressing the intake valve. Alright, intake valve just came back up. There it goes down. And it's compressing the exhaust, and here it comes back up. Uh-oh. Okay, compressing the intake, going down, Here it comes back up. Okay, it's just past top dead center, but that's good enough because nothing is compressed. Intake is not tight. The exhaust feels a little tighter than it should be. So let's check it. There it is. So you'll find various valve lash settings. It varies depending on where you find it, but I just read that there are specs out there anywhere from 3 thousandths to 8 thousandths, and the exhaust valve should always be a little bit looser than the intake valve. So I'm going to basically use the same specs, although this is a pushrod motor. I'm going to use the same specs that I do for my TW200, which is an overhead cam engine, because the range of specs I've seen is about the same. So what I'm going to do, I use 4 thousandths intake and 6 thousandths exhaust, I believe, on the TW. So I'm going to do the same thing here. There's 2.5, 2, 1.5, here we go, 3, 4, I don't know, 5 might be better. I see the 5 blade is bent, so that means I've been using it. Let's check it with 4. I don't think 4 is even going to go in the exhaust. Nope. Sure enough, the exhaust is tight. Let me pause it right here. I've got to grab my 9mm wrench for that nut. Okay. I just bought this wrench at AutoZone. They had it clearance priced at, I think it was $1. And it's a 9mm. Let's see. Huh, I'm surprised. Okay, it's probably going to be a 10mm then. I know the TW200 is 9mm, and I know this because I had to actually buy a 9mm wrench to do it, because wrench sets don't generally include 9mm. It's not a common size. So after I paid $8 or something for a 9mm wrench, then I run across one for $1 at AutoZone. And to be clear, I looked at AutoZone before I bought it and could not find one. So I guess they must have got a few in and then immediately clearance priced them, put them on clearance. But so anyway, 10mm, just loosen the lock nut. Wow, that's tight. There we go. Go ahead and loosen the intake too. Alright, so back it off a bit. And we were going to go 6 thousandths. 6 thousandths. I think I went 7. I think I went 5 intake and 7 exhaust on the TW. But we're going to go 6 thousandths on the exhaust. Okay. And yeah, it is 10 millimeter, the lock nut. So I'm using the little micro pliers on my Victorinox Swiss Army Deluxe Tinker to hold the actual adjustment screw so that it doesn't turn when I tighten the lock nut. Hang on, let me check that again, because I let it move a little bit. Sometimes what I do is keep the feeler blade in there, but I'm not going to do that this time. Okay. Alright, double check it. Boy. Okay. Alright, now we're going to go 4 thousandths on the intake. 4 thousandths of an inch, by the way, just so there's no question. Six thousandths on exhaust, 6 thousandths of an inch, which is 0.152 millimeter, and 4 thousandths of an inch on the intake, which is 0.102 millimeter, or .102. Most people say dot nowadays, and we do that on the radio too. Alright, there we go. An interesting thing about these engines is that the cam only has one lobe, and that lobe actuates both the intake and exhaust valves. There's one other engine that I'm familiar with, somewhat familiar with, that does that, and that's the old Continental Hurricane 6-cylinder engine. 230, I think, yeah. 230 Hurricane Continental engine that was used in Jeep Wagoneers, early Jeep Wagoneers, very early, as in 1963. I think 63 was the first year of the Wagoneer, and 65, I guess, was the last year they used that. In 65 they transitioned over to different engines, maybe the AMC 232 for a base engine, I think, and the AMC 326, I believe. No, 326 was a Pontiac. What was that little AMC V8? Anyway, there was a little AMC V8, not the 304. This was before the 304 came out. But I think the 304 came into existence in 1970. But anyway, no matter. The Jeep military pickup truck of that era also used that engine. It was an overhead cam, single overhead cam, inline 6, 230, and it had 140 horsepower, and it had like 210 foot-pounds of torque, I think. It had about 1600 RPM. But that thing, it was an overhead cam with one set of lobes, one lobe per cylinder on the cam. Had a real long timing chain, which was a bad thing. This engine doesn't have a timing chain. The cam is down in the engine case instead of being up on the head, and that was the intention of this engine. This engine was based on the XL 125, SL 125, which was before the XL, the I think CB 125, variety of 125 bikes had that engine, and it was a 125cc overhead cam. Very good little engine, but a Honda engineer discovered that he, on a visit to Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand, those areas, he discovered people using the little Hondas as basically pickup trucks, family cars, and everything, and they were getting pretty much no maintenance. He was aghast, but he quickly decided that it would be good to design an engine that would stand up better to that sort of abuse. And which, you know, the overhead cam engine was standing up pretty well to it. But what he did was he drew a design on a napkin or something like that. The story goes that it was on his flight home or something, and then he gets back home to Japan and presents it to the CEO of Honda, and the CEO put out a call for the rest of the engineers to work on it, and they came up with this design, which is basically the same engine, except that they moved the cam down into the engine case so it could be directly oiled. It could even be splash oiled, and so it's down there where it stays cooler and stays well oiled, instead of, you know, needing the pressure lube to the top. And because a set of rockers are, you know, do a lot better with limited oiling than a cam does. And also the other thing is, you know, the overhead cam engine has a timing chain, and timing chains don't do well with a lack of maintenance either. So bottom line, they moved the cam down here so that it's gear driven with no timing chain, and like I said, it's down there where it stays nice and cool and lubricated. And they later came up with a version of this engine that has a countershaft balancer, and this one doesn't have that. But something I heard about the counterbalanced engine is that it uses a chain to drive the oil pump. This doesn't. The non-counterbalanced engine doesn't. It just, you know, gear drives the oil pump. I guess they had to move the oil pump to make room for the counterbalancer assembly. So this is basically, I mean, this is designed to be an ultra reliable engine, even under adverse conditions. And that's enough of that for now, I guess. So did I tighten this down? Yes, I did. So Let's double check it, which I probably already did that, but I forgot while I was talking. So we'll double check it again. 4 thousandths. Make sure that 4 thousandths fits. And I know that, yeah, I know that I double checked the exhaust. Let's check it with 5 thousandths. That seems 5 thousandths will actually go in the intake. I don't know. Nah, that's fine. That's fine for now. So we have checked and adjusted the valves. And it was a little bit tight on the exhaust. So it should start and run better now. Next thing I'm going to do is work on the carburetor. And I'm going to take it off because the idle adjustment screw is under here, underneath. So I need to get to it, and what I'll have to do is take this clamp off, and the clamp was put on improperly, so I'll fix that when I put it back on. I've got to take these 2 nuts off, and then the carburetor will come off. So that's what I'm going to do now. Okay, as you can see, because because I had the throttle slide unscrewed from the top and the fuel line removed from the tank, removing those 2 nuts allowed me to completely pull the carb off. And it's got gas in it, so I'm going to try not to spill it. Oh, by the way, look at that. You can see all the way through it because the slide is out. Now, the choke on these things, down is open. Up 1 click is half, and up all the way is all the way closed. Full choke. So, in case anybody had any question about that, because it's not really covered in the manual. But right here, let's see, yeah, right here underneath the outlet of the carburetor where it bolts to the intake manifold, directly underneath it is where the pilot screw is, and it's got a plastic plug in it. So I'm using this thing to attempt to pop that plug out. That way, if I need to later on, and I probably will, I can adjust the idle mixture. And like I said before, I'm not going to do that right off the bat. Okay, there's the plug. And it does indeed have a slotted idle screw in there, pilot screw. I tell you what, I think I'm going to, since I've got it out, I'm just going to see. Oh, why won't that go back in there? Oh, I see. Okay. So I'm going to see how far out it is right now as a baseline. So I'm going to put that in there and count the number of turns to lightly bottomed. So I'll turn it clockwise, and 1 1/4. Okay. One and a quarter. I think I'm going to make it 1 1/2. There we go. One and a half. I increased it by a 1/4 turn. Now, just in case you don't know, the way the pilot screw works is if it's on the back of the carburetor, as it is on the VM26, it controls the airflow, and in that case you back it out to for lean or turn it in for rich. It's the opposite if it's on the front of the carburetor like it is on this one. You turn it in for lean and out for rich. So I've seen a couple of comments that this carburetor is basically just like the VM26 except it's not adjustable. Actually, that's not true. The idle circuit is completely different. But it is a round slide carburetor like the VM26. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out. So we are putting it back on. And put the nuts back on it. 10mm. Alright, we'll pause it here while I do that. Okay, carb's back on and the intake hose is back on and tightened. And next thing we're going to do is shim up the needle. And also I want to point something out real quick. I'm leaving the plug out right now so that I can test the stator for voltage output in a minute. Voltage and current output. And of course I got to figure out which leads are coming out of the DC stator windings. But I just wanted to point out that even if I'm not able to get to the bottom of that and get it working today, this morning, which I probably won't be able to because it's beginning to get pretty hot already. You can see that the sun has, well, the earth has moved to where the sun is beating down on this spot now, where it wasn't when I started out. And I've got sweat dripping off of me already, so I'm probably just about done here for now. But I want to go ahead and shim this needle up. But even if I decide to go for a ride on it, I can still do that. The battery's right over there and I've charged it And so with a charged battery, I can ride around for a while, because as I pointed out earlier, the DC output doesn't affect the ignition, so I can ride, you know, and I'll actually be able to ride for probably 2 or 3 hours before I have any problem with the battery running down, unless I have to run full headlight. Now this has a running light and not an actual headlight, I guess. It's just a low wattage running light. According to the specs, I believe it's 35 watts on high beam and 5 watts on low beam. It's actually got a separate little incandescent bulb for the low beam and running light. So I can run that. 5 watts there, and I think it's just 5 watts on the tail light too, plus whatever the fuel gauge runs. And I would be able to ride for a few hours on a charged battery, even if the bike is not charging. So I can still go for a ride today if I want to, even with it not charging, especially now that I'm aware of the problem. So I might do that. But here's what we're doing next. So here's the slide, and pull the spring back, and you see there is a retainer spring in there that holds the needle in. So you got to with a little pair of pliers clamp down on that. Be careful not to lose it, and there it is. Okay. I don't even have to undo the cable, but so there's the needle, and it doesn't have any slots. It's got a number on it. It's only got the one slot. But here's what I did. This is exactly the same thing Moto Cheese did too. I dug around and came up with a couple of little washers. One of them has a larger hole, so I'll put the one with the larger hole on the bottom. The one with the smaller hole can cover it. So I just thread them on like so, and all that does is spaces the needle up, because that E-clip is still there, so that it'll sit on top of these two washers. And then drop it back in there. And that's the same thing as having a lower slot that you can move the E-clip to. So I need to put the little retainer spring back in there. And of course it turned sideways when I released it, so try again. These can sometimes be a little bit tedious, but you know, not too bad. Not too bad. What I did is released it a little bit above the top end of the needle, so I can push it down a little bit at a time, one end and then the other. There we go. So it doesn't turn sideways. Okay, now put the spring back in there. And oh, by the way, this screw right here on the side of the carburetor is the idle speed adjustment. And on most carbs, that screw is knurled. I could probably replace it with a screw from another carburetor I've got. And in fact, I might do that later. But this one actually, this one is actually a security star, a security Torx. So it's got a Torx, or maybe it's a internal hex. I don't remember for sure. I think it's a Torx though. But it's got the little post in the middle. So nobody can tinker with it without the tool. Of course, the tool does come in the toolbox, the tool bag, so it's not a big problem. But just wanted to point that out. But what you do is you turn it clockwise to raise the idle, counterclockwise to lower the idle. Simple. On the VM26, it's on the left side. Anyway, look at the slide. It's got this short slot on this side, and that short slot is what the idle speed adjustment screw engages. See, it's got a ramp in there. On the other side is a slot, and there's a pin inside the carburetor that fits in that slot, and it prevents the slide from turning. So you got to make sure it goes in the right way, otherwise it won't go in. Just got to be careful about that, because you know, if it doesn't go in correctly, it is possible to get it to go in. There we go. It's possible to get it to go in part of the way and be able to screw the lid down, and then what's going to happen whenever you start it up, it's going to be at wide open throttle and you won't be able to change it. You'll have to immediately shut it down before it slings a rod or something. So you want to make sure that that goes in properly, that it goes all the way down. Then you close that down and we're ready to put it back together. Except, like I said, I'm going to check the stator and see what's going on with it. But I'll discuss that either in a later clip of this particular video or in a later video, one or the other. Probably a later video. I have figured out why there was no charging going on. So there is the voltage regulator, and you can see the wire coming out of it, and there's the connector. I unplugged it, and can you see that? One of the pins, the pin for the black wire, is bent over against the pin for the pink wire. So that's why it wasn't charging. Now, hopefully that didn't take anything out, and if it didn't, just by bending that pin over, making sure it's inserted fully, and plugging the connector back together carefully should fix the problem. So we'll find out.